Hi BookTube, and welcome to my Friday Reads video. So it's 3 novels this week, or one's a novella possibly. So Dave Eggers' latest book, The Parade, which I think came out earlier this month. Kent Haruf, Benediction. It's my first exposure to Kent Haruf. And Adam Thirlwell, Kapow, which is a novella length book, 81 pages. So I'm going to start with the Eggers. So this is my second Eggers book in a couple of weeks, because I'd read this, which turned out to be non-fiction. I assumed it was fiction. I'm going to talk about more about this in my non-fiction November wrap-up. But there's context. I so didn't like this book, because I think Eggers is a much better fiction writer than a non-fiction writer. But I was desperate to read something. Unfortunately, this has just come out. Okay, so a unnamed country from the undeveloped world is just emerging from a bloody civil war, and lots of international agencies and NGOs are helping with reconstruction, and one of which is to build a road, a completely new paved road over sort of dust tracks, linking the capital in the north, which is the developed part of the country, to the rural south, which is completely undeveloped. And there's 20 days to complete this task, because the president wants to stage a parade along this new road in 20 days' time to, as a gesture of, unification and reconstruction. And the two characters charged with laying this road, one is driving the machine that sort of basically lays down the tarmac and also the road markings at the same time. And the other guy sort of goes ahead on a quad bike to make sure there's no issues like potholes, craters, people standing in the road that need to be moved on, all this kind of thing. And interestingly, they're not given names, they're given numbers. They're given the numbers 4 and 9, and the reason they're given numbers is it's company policy, because the company is sort of does this work all over the world in trouble spots and sees it as a security measure. To protect its staff. It has this very much sort of colonial attitude of that the natives will rob from you, they will con you, or they will kidnap you for ransom. And the guy who's in the machine that lays the paving, who's 4, he's very much by the book, follow the company rules, don't interact with the natives. He is literally ploughing a straight line of the road that he's laying. He will not deviate at all. And the other guy, who's 9, is absolutely the opposite. He is living in the moment. He keeps going off-road to sort of mix with the natives. He's very much about the experience, and this drives the other guy to distraction. Now, all of that is brilliantly set up in the first 16 pages, which made, why I find this book so baffling, because it took 120 pages of setup to get to the point of the story that was being told here. Whereas here, it's a return to form for Eggers, because I find him a very, very economical, easy author. Even something like The Circle, which had great ideas in it, was so simply and beautifully executed, as is this for 100 pages. And it's only when something sort of turns circumstances on its head, and 9 is sort of out of action, and 4 has to sort of go off the book and go off the road to help 9. And then I felt that a lot of the energies and the interest of the book was dribbled away, really, and that the last 50 pages just didn't work for me at all. And I so enjoyed the first 100 pages. I bombed through this book in a day, but I give it 4.5 stars simply because I felt not only did it lose its energies by the end, I also guessed the end. I mean, I can't talk about it because obviously it's the end, it's a spoiler, but I totally guessed where this book would end up. I think one of the things Eggers was doing was that this was really a rebuttal to Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Because when 4 has to help 9, and he has to interact with the natives to help get their help to overcome the situation, the tone is like the company and like 4, and like Eggers writes it, is that he's going to be kidnapped at any moment, or he's going to be stolen from at any moment. And it isn't. It's saying, no, these are good people. These are moral people, the same as the people in the West, the good people in the West. But I didn't feel that was as skillfully done as because he kept having to sort of ramp up the menace, and then it was anticlimactic because the menace didn't deliver because these were good guys in a way. So I felt that was a problem. But I did like the idea that this guy is driving a road paver absolutely straight down the line, whereas the other guy, he's already having a parade. Every night he goes off the road and he mixes with the locals and he drinks with them and dances with them and has sex with the women and all that. So that is his parade. That is the parade, really the only parade that matters. That whatever parade the president has in mind is a symbolic thing. It's there's no reality to it. It's a demonstration of a fragile unity, and perhaps even worse. Again, I can't go into that because it would be a spoiler. But 4.5 stars, just a shame about where it ended up. And on to Kent Haruf, Benediction. So Jason over at Old Blues Chapter and Verse recommended me this book last year when I was talking to him about I wanted to read books on death, and he said this would adjust the ticket. Hadn't got round to reading it last year. This year, Jason, as you may know, is doing a sort of online on YouTube, BookTube, once a month course which he calls You Carry a Coffin Today, about books and films and how they treat death. And fortunately, this is December's, next month's choice. Now, I had to read it in November for various commitments I have in December, so I wanted to make sure that I was ready when Jason talks about it, that I could contribute. So I read this, and again, it only took me 2 days. It's very economically written. There's no adornment to the prose. I asked the question of people familiar with Haruf. Is all his work like that? And I'll come back to why I asked that question. So this is small town Colorado, very small town Colorado, and Dad Lewis, who is in his 70s, I guess, is dying. He has a terminal illness and he has 2 months to live, and he's not in a hospital. He can die at home with his very, very steadfast and loyal wife, Mary. But it's not just about him. It is about the little community around them. So their next door neighbour, who's a sort of grandmother, is having to look after her little granddaughter called Alice, because Alice's mother and the grandmother's daughter died of cancer. There are 2 women called Johnsons who are mother and daughter. The mother is, again, I think in her 70s, and the daughter's in her 50s, and she is a spinster. And they, because of their lack and their longing, they sort of, keep taking Alice out for treats, food and new clothes, and buy her a bike and all this sort of thing. So there's that relationship. Once Dad Lewis has got his diagnosis, his daughter Lorraine comes back from Denver to spend the last 2 months with the dad and the mother. But the absentee is Frank, the son, who's Lorraine's brother, who we find out that basically Frank was driven away by the father when his sort of homosexuality became known to his father. And then there's a preacher who's been sent away from Denver because he was basically supporting homosexuality within Christianity, ends up in this small town. But again, he's losing his faith because he has these very strong moral beliefs. In this case, it's about war and terrorism. And it's totally out of step with the community that he's being asked to preach to. So he is struggling with his faith. And the book is simply very quiet, sort of contemplation of how all these characters, on the one hand, there are enormous acts of kindness between them. And on the other hand, there's this great lack and longing. So the missing son who was driven away by Dad Lewis, the spinster who never got married, she had the love of her life, it didn't work. Even Lorraine has lost a 16-year-old daughter who was killed in a car crash. So that as much as they're each very, very kind and tender, there's also something missing in their lives. And I think that's what the book is, because it's really about, is this all there is to life? So the preacher, during his sort of crisis of faith, is out at night looking through people's windows. People in their houses at night, these ordinary lives, passing without their knowing it. I'd hoped to recapture something. The police officer stared at him. The precious ordinary. So it's asking the question, is the precious ordinary, very small things, is that enough to constitute a worthwhile life? You know, is it worth living for just the precious ordinary when you can't really rise above that? And there's more, you know, they asked the preacher to say a prayer over Dad Lewis as, you know, he's taken a turn for the worse. May this man, he stopped and spoke directly to Dad in the bed, may you leave this physical world without any more pain or regret or unhappiness or remorse or self-doubt or worry, and may you let all your trials and troubles and cares pass away. May you simply be at peace. May each of us here in this room be at peace as well. Now we ask all of those blessings in the name of Jesus himself, Jesus, who himself was the Prince of Peace. Amen. And again, I think that's the core of the book, in that we live these lives with suffering and tribulation as well as, you know, happiness and joy. But come the point of death, we don't have to suffer anymore. That's it. Leave it behind. Just, you know, hopefully attain peace. Is that enough? You know, does that make everything that's come before it, both the happiness and the tribulations, is that enough to say, okay, that's it, I'm done, I'm checking out, I'm moving away from it? And to me, and this is something I struggle with, not in a religious way, but in, you know, in my own writings, and it's absolutely the core of my work in progress at the moment, is, well, you know, if these happinesses that we have in life are so great, so sort of magnetic, so desirable, so stimulating of our serotonin or whatever the relevant, you know, brain chemistry is, why would we give them up at death? You know, not in the sense of why, because obviously we have no choice, but why would we make this pact that this why this preacher is saying, may you leave this physical world without any more pain or regret or unhappiness or remorse or self-doubt? You know, if the good outweighs the bad, why would you make that deal? Why would you surrender them? And if the bad outweighs the good, if the suffering, the tribulation is so bad you just want relief from it in death, then what does that say about life? Was it worth living at all if all it was this pain and affliction that gets to such a point you just want to leave it behind? So I think that's what the book is. Coming back to his style, there was one beautiful, beautiful scene where the mother and her spinster daughter, Alice, who they've taken out, and Lorraine, who's Dad Lewis's daughter. So they're 4 different generations in terms of age of women, and only 2 of them are related. They all go into this sort of water tank, which is sort of the source water for cattle to drink from a duct further down. And they all strip off and they all persuade each other to go in and bathe in this. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful scene, because you see, you know, he describes the bodies of these 4 women at 4 different ages, 4 different levels of physical development, stroke, deterioration. And the sheer pleasure of that sensation of them freeing their bodies, you know, being naked, not for a male gaze, not even really for the sisterhood, but just for themselves. The first time they'd unbutton themselves in probably an age. And it's a beautiful, beautiful scene, which tells me that Kent Haruf can write. But the rest of the book doesn't reach that level of reading pleasure. And I compare this to John McGregor, the British writer, who also writes a very minimalist style. And I can't stand John McGregor. He drives me to distraction. The 2 books of his that I've read, are there in my sort of worst reads ever, because they never rise off the page. They are about the humdrum, which comes back to the message of this book. You know, is a lean style, which one can appreciate, but a subject matter of, well, is this all there is to life? Is that it? Is that the deal? Frustrate me immensely. I mean, on a personal level, but also to read about them, because I don't agree with it somehow, I guess. Now, I would say that this Kent Haruf book was infinitely more pleasurable than any John McGregor for me. And that one scene alone of the 4 women was just, I shall remember that for a long time, because it's a beautiful, beautiful scene. But even that, you know, the grandmother who's in her 70s, it's taken her that long to reach that one moment of pleasure. You know, it's not enough, to my mind. Now, I'm not saying Haruf's wrong to write it like that. It may be extremely realistic for that woman, that character, for the first time to feel unbuttoned and liberated and free. But it's not enough. And I struggle with books that are small scale, celebrate the mundane, celebrate the humdrum, celebrate the quotidian. because I personally need there to be more than that in life, and I kind of need there to be more than that in literature. But, you know, as I say, I infinitely prefer this to John McGregor. I would give this 4 stars. I disagree with its thesis, or want a better word, but it's really well done. And finally, to Adam Thirlwell, Kapow. So about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, I read my first Adam Thirlwell called Lurid and Cute. Hated it, but I thought, you know, originally I wanted to read this because it's about the Arab Spring, and I couldn't get hold of it because it's out of print. So I wanted to see what Thirlwell was like. So I read Lurid and Cute, hated it, but I thought, you know, I've got to stick to my original intention. I wanted to read this. It sounded good, and I managed to track down, thanks to Alan over at Big Hard Books and Classics, a copy of this from Thrift Books, and it arrived pretty quickly from America. It's only 80 pages. It's published by Visual Editions, who are an imprint I really, really like. You may remember that book by Jonathan Safran Foer that they published, where there was cutouts of the pages, so you could read the words at sort of 15, 20 pages further in. I think it was called Street of Trees. I think that's what it was called. I haven't read that. It's too expensive at the moment to afford, but one day I'd like to read that. And this is also, so I don't know if you can see, so there's sort of bits of text at sort of crazy angles. There's also, you know, there's another almost on every page, but you also get things like that fold-out pages. There's not much text on that. I'll find another fold-out page where there's more text. Easier said than done. And again, another sort of shape of the text on the page. Yeah, so there we go. There's an example of a massive fold-out page. I'm not even sure if I actually realised that it was there and I read all of that. But as intriguing as all that was, I'm not quite sure why that's done, or why we have, you know, blocks of text at funny angles, because sometimes, you know, there is a metafictional element of this book, which I'll talk about in a minute. So sometimes it's the author talking, and that's fine. It's legitimate to put those in these, you know, strange, you know, non-linear text. But other times it's sort of the characters, so I couldn't quite see the logic of it. It's set in the Arab Spring, but it's also, the metafictional elements is the author, presumably Adam Thirlwell, or at least an author character, travelling in the back of a cab in London, through hipster London, wondering how he can write about revolutions and what revolutions mean, and befriending someone who escaped the Arab Spring, who's now relocated to London, and talking to him about it. And at the heart of writing about the Arab Spring in an unspecified country, I think it might be Bahrain, but it's not specified, there's a love story going on between two characters who are already in committed relationships. One's married and one isn't, and there's a big age difference. So it's a taboo relationship, and you know, both of them are sort of thinking, well, you know, we're out in the streets protesting inequality and stuff. You know, is somehow our personal desires and wanting this relationship to go forward, is that sort of a triviality that distracts us from the true thing of the revolution? And yet, in a way, it represents revolution, because it would be breaking a taboo if they could do that out in the open, kind of thing. So there's all this stuff going on, and there's a lot about the author wondering how to write about this, particularly when you're in, you know, safe, secure, bourgeois London, you know, having expensive cups of coffee and stuff, you know, how you can write about what's going on in a country that's suffering. And just to read you a short bit. While in London, Fariak, who's the cabbie he befriends, talked to me about a new dawn. I found this phrasing cute. It was like the way Marx had it. Revolutionaries were comical. They said they were creating a new world, and then they just got out the same old posters. A time machine. For instance, I was still buying the World newspapers, and in one newspaper photo, a girl was wearing a headband with a Che Guevara print. Another had a Che Guevara pendant, which hung over her red and white keffiyeh. I mean, seriously, Che? Are you kidding me? This image of Che was repeated in all the era's revolutions, on the posters of protesters in Libya, in the graffiti found in Yemen, But then again, I know, it might look the same, but who was I to say? So he's sort of making the point that in some ways revolution and ideology has been sort of commercialised. He also makes the point of, okay, well, you're out in the streets and you create a power vacuum because you've got rid of the leader. But then what? How do you then bring about genuine change and transformation of society? And of course in Egypt, the military moved into that vacuum because they weren't able to come up with something quickly enough to replace the fallen president. So it's a strange book. I mean, I did really enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars. In fact, I gave all 3 books this week 4 stars. I did enjoy it. It doesn't particularly hold together coherently, but I don't think that it was trying to. It was more a sort of, not a thought experiment, because that sounds half-formed and not got all the way through to being a sort of final version. It's not that. There was enough in here that I enjoyed and appreciated, but possibly an acquired taste. So there you have it. I'm quickly going to talk about 3 books that arrived today that were all published today. I'm very excited by these. So Scarlett Thomas, one of my favourite authors, who I think was in my favourite authors under the maybe or nearly. So this is her new book called Oligarchy. Now her previous 2 books have been for children. Oh, I've got a moth in here, which frustrated me mightily because I won't read children's books. So I'm glad she's writing for grown-ups again. I shall be reading this starting tomorrow. It should definitely be in next week's Friday Reads. And Ben Lerner, the Topeka School, Topeka in Kansas, I think. Now, I know Ben Lerner hacks a lot of booktubers off, including Brian of Bookish. Ben Lerner's previous 2 books are incredibly self-indulgent. This sounded a bit more engaged in the world and politics. Let's read what it's about. Adam Gordon is a senior at Topeka High School, class of 97. His parents are psychologists, his mum a famous author in the field. A renowned debater and orator, an aspiring poet, aren't all his characters aspiring poets, and although it requires a lot of posturing and weightlifting, one of the cool kids. He's also one of the seniors who brings the loner Darren Eberhardt into the social scene with disastrous effects. Deftly shifting perspectives and time periods, the Topeka School is a riveting story about the challenges of raising a good son in a culture of toxic masculinity. I think that's what interested me. It is also a startling prehistory of the present. The collapse of public speech, the tyranny of trolls and the new right, and the ongoing crisis of identity amongst white men. So, I think that sounds really interesting. Unfortunately, there's a quote from Sally Rooney on the back. She says, the Topeka School is a novel of exhilarating intellectual inquiry, penetrating social insight and deep psychological sensitivity. To the extent that we can speak of a future at present, I think the future of the novel is here. I hate when people say that, because it suggests that this is a new form for the novel, and I'm sure it isn't. Anyway. And the third, which Eric Carl Anderson was talking about under his haul for November, I suppose. Gareth E. Rees, Car Park Life, a portrait of Britain's unexplored urban wildernesses. Literally, the guy drove up and down the country visiting car parks, which are a sort of liminal space where people park their cars, leave to go shopping or to meetings or to sports events or whatever. So these spaces don't seem to have any integrity in themselves. They're sort of they're transition points to the real destination. But lots of interesting stuff goes on there. Drug deals, grime videos are filmed there, stabbings, robbery, all this sort of stuff, and good stuff as well, I think. So this is non-fiction. This is very much slightly off the wall. I'm not sure when I'm going to get to it, but I was intrigued enough by this to invest in it. So that's my Friday Reads. Thanks very much. Till next time.